Hey everyone, it's Alexander Robinson. Welcome to the channel, and continuing with my goal of making 2 retro reviews each month throughout the year of 2024, we come to what I'm calling Double Feature Exploitation Month. If you pay attention to my community tab, or you saw my review for Schindler's List, you know that I'll be reviewing 3, technically 4 movies this month as double feature reviews. And without further ado, let's just hop into the first one. The first retro review for this month is going to be Grindhouse, which came out in 2007 and technically is 2 movies in one. Planet Terror, directed by Robert Rodriguez, and Death Proof, directed by Quentin Tarantino. So what exactly is this movie? Well, considering that most of my audience consists of people from the ages of 18 to 44, that's right, I actually check my analytics every now and then, y'all probably weren't alive when the Grindhouse movie was a thing. I know I sure as hell wasn't. So what Grindhouse was, it was a type of movie that was coming out in the 70s. They were really cheap, very exploitative, basically consisted a lot of action, horror, sex, and there were so few prints of these movies made that they would just ship around the country to various small theaters, and the prints would usually look like garbage just because they were being transported everywhere. So in 2007, Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, who are big fans of this type of movie, decided to actually make a Grindhouse movie themselves. And this is 100% a throwback film. Usually the Grindhouse movies back in the day would be released as double features. You get 2 movies in one showing, and that's the intent that Rodriguez and Tarantino wanted to do. So the way this review is going to work, since I'm technically reviewing 2 movies, I'm going to be giving individual reviews to both Planet Terror and Death Proof. I will give a rating for each film, and then I will rate Grindhouse overall based on what I said about the movies individually. And of course, the trailers. I saw this movie in its entirety, trailers and all, so I'm not going to forget those. But first, let's kick things off with the first movie in this double feature, Planet Terror. This movie follows a go-go dancer played by Rose McGowan, who finds herself in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And it basically consists of her and a bunch of other people trying to survive and fight back against these zombies. And it's pretty much an okay movie. If you see the poster, if you know Robert Rodriguez as a director, you kind of know exactly the type of movie you're going to get with this. And it serves its purpose. It definitely has a lot of fantastic gore effects. The gore effects were done by Greg Nicotero, who is right up there with Tom Savini in terms of practical effects. And there are some impressive practical effects throughout. One of the most impressive involves the soldier played by Quentin Tarantino, who dies a horrible death, and the gore effects are just gross, they're disgusting, but they are fun as hell to watch. The action scenes are pretty good as well. Rodriguez is obviously an expert when it comes to action sequences. I mean, if you saw Mandalorian Season 2, his episode had some kick-ass action scenes. And of course, a lot of his other movies have some really great action. And the movie, considering that's a zombie movie, it's very well paced, it's never boring, but this also doesn't really feel like a Grindhouse movie. If Rodriguez's goal with Planet Terror was to actually make an authentic Grindhouse movie, I don't think he succeeded, because a lot of the action scenes, as fun as they are way too grand in terms of its scale. The explosions are massive, the stunts are over-the-top ridiculous, and there's no way a Grindhouse movie from the 70s could afford to be able to do all of those things. It just feels too clean and polished, even with all the fake artifacts, which that's another issue I have with the movie. Yes, it's trying to go for that old look, like the movie's been transported around the entire country to different theaters, but the problem is that this movie was shot digitally. And those artifacts stick out like a sore thumb. And also, there's a break in the movie with a missing reel that kind of derails the entire movie. And yes, once again, I understand that this is what Grindhouse movies experienced back in the day, but just because they did that stuff back then doesn't mean you really should apply that to your actual Grindhouse throwback film. Overall, Planet Terror, it's a fun movie. If you can be in the mindset for some over-the-top action and just non-stop gore, then it can be enjoyed, but for me myself, I'd say watch at your own risk. I think between the artifacts and just the overall idea that this is a huge-scale Grindhouse movie, I can't really give it that high of a recommendation. And also, a lot of the actors are just kind of meh. Rose McGowan is fine. Josh Brolin is okay. Bruce Willis doesn't really have a whole lot to do in this movie, but he's fine. All the actors do a fine job, but nobody sticks out in this movie. So that was Planet Terror. Next up we have Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof, which is basically about this stuntman, played by Kurt Russell, who goes around killing girls with his car. Essentially, it's a slasher movie, but the killer uses a car as a weapon, and it's actually a pretty cool concept. I'll say this right now, I like Death Proof far more than I like Planet Terror, because this movie feels more authentic to what the Grindhouse films were trying to do. Quentin Tarantino decided to shoot this movie on film, thus all of the artifacts aren't as in your face and feel more authentic to the movie itself. I think the actors do a much better job in this movie than they did Planet Terror, and to emphasize that point, Rose McGowan pops up in both movies. She's in Death Proof in a small role, but I think she's much better in this movie than she was in Planet Terror, which, by the way, if I may backtrack to Planet Terror, the whole movie is marketed around the idea that Rose McGowan is kicking ass and shooting zombies with a gun leg. She doesn't get that till the last 10 minutes of the movie, and she really doesn't do a whole lot with it. But back to Death Proof, I just found this movie more authentic to the actual Grindhouse experience. A lot of the other actors in this movie, like Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Rosario Dawson, Zoe Bell, Sidney Poitier. No, not that Sidney Poitier. I'm talking about his daughter, Sidney Poitier. Yeah, that's not confusing at all. Vanessa, Ferlito, Tracie, Thoms, all of these actors do a good job, but Kurt Russell is the one that steals the entire show. He is fantastic as Stuntman Mike, and the reason he works so well in this movie is because as a villain, he is so unassuming. You look at Kurt Russell, and you think nothing but charisma. This guy is just naturally cool. So he would be the last person you suspect of being a serial killer. And there are definitely a lot of scenes throughout this movie where he's interacting with the other actors. Sometimes the conversations worked really well, which, if I may draw attention to one of the biggest criticisms that people have with this movie, is that in terms of the dialogue, this is probably Quentin Tarantino at his most self-indulgent. Not to mention that throughout the years since this movie came out, a lot of people have said, girls don't talk like that. And look, I'm not a woman, I can't really speak on behalf of women, but when I watch this movie and listen to the dialogue, I really don't believe at all that these are the conversations that women would be having. Especially when it comes to Tracie Thoms' character. A lot of her dialogue sounds like it was written for Samuel L. Jackson because she throws in quite a lot of motherfuckers in there and delivers it in the same way Samuel L. Jackson would deliver it. It just didn't feel natural. So for any women out there, if you've seen this movie, I want to hear your take on the dialogue. Do women actually talk like this? It just doesn't sound organic to me, but I would love to hear a woman's perspective on these scenes. Now, when the movie actually started out, I didn't have too much of an issue with the dialogue. A bigger issue that I had with this movie, more than the actual dialogue, was how this movie kind of feels like two movies in one already. Because the first half follows a group of girls in Austin, Texas, which, by the way, I never lived in Austin, but I can't believe I'm at a point where I actually recognize certain locations in Austin, Texas. I guess that shows how much I love that city. But anyway, the first half of the movie follows a group of girls, and it has that Grindhouse look to it, film artifacts and everything. And then by the end of the first half, Stuntman Mike kills all of those girls that we were introduced to. So when the second half starts, we're introduced to a brand new group of girls. Two of them played by Rosario Dawson and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. And then when you get to the middle of that second half, the movie just throws away the Grindhouse look to it and looks more like a movie that was shot and made in 2007. It's so jarring, and that, I think, may be the worst aspect about the movie than the actual dialogue itself. But that being said, I feel like if you can sit through all that, you are rewarded with what may be one of the greatest car chases ever made. The big chase at the end of the movie where Stuntman Mike is chasing the second group of girls, and you have Stuntwoman Zoe Bell hanging on the actual hood of the car. That scene is intense, you're on the edge of your seat, it's all in camera, and it's exciting as hell. So if it wasn't for that car chase at the end, I'd also say watch your own risk, but because of that car chase, it bumped it up to good but not great. Even if I were to put that car chase aside, this is still a superior movie to Planet Terror because the actors are better, the concept is more original and creative, and it feels more like an authentic Grindhouse movie. So if I had to pick one of these movies, I'd say Death Proof is the one that I prefer over the two. But that's not all that Grindhouse has to offer, because before Planet Terror starts, there's a trailer to a at the time fake movie, Machete, starring Danny Trejo, and that trailer is so good. Like, that actually feels like an authentic Grindhouse trailer, except for some big explosions. My favorite line in that trailer is, "They just fucked with the wrong Mexican." And that is something that a Grindhouse trailer would definitely do. The other trailers I find to be pretty hit or miss to me. There's Werewolf Women of the SS, which is directed by Rob Zombie, and it's a fine trailer, but considering Rob Zombie's filmography, this is a movie that I don't want to see happen. However, the next trailer for Edgar Wright's Don't, that's a movie I'd like to see, because the trailer is made in the style of the old Hammer horror movies. And if Machete and Thanksgiving ended up being movies sometime in the future, I would love to see Edgar Wright's Don't. And speaking of Thanksgiving, that's the other trailer in this movie from Eli Roth, which actually got made into a movie last November. I didn't see it, but if I had seen it, I probably wouldn't have been aware at all that it was based on this trailer. I also know that in some screenings, there was a trailer for Hobo with a Shotgun, which also got turned into a movie. That was actually included on the Blu-ray I have for Grindhouse. It wasn't actually part of the movie itself, which is why I'm not going to talk about it, because I don't really want to talk about bonus features. Instead, I just want to talk about the movie itself. So as for Grindhouse itself, the whole experience, I really like the trailers. If I thought Planet Terror was a movie that you should watch at your own risk, and Death Proof is a movie that is good but not great, I guess I'll say good but not great at the end. Overall, I think this is a movie that was an interesting experiment. It's clear that both Rodriguez and Tarantino were a fan of these type of movies, but in terms of actually delivering an authentic Grindhouse experience from the 70s, this movie looks a little too clean and polished, and also there are too many big A-list actors to really pass as an authentic Grindhouse movie. But at the end of the day, the trailers made it worth it, and it was entertaining. Again, like I said with Planet Terror, it was entertaining from beginning to end, even though I think the overall movie is just kind of eh. And then Death Proof itself, even though there's a lot of parts where it drags, I thought the actors were better, and that car chase at the end was just the chef's kiss. If you were to ever see Grindhouse, I would recommend that you try to see it in a theater, because this is really the only way to experience it. In fact, a few days ago, they actually showed Grindhouse as a double feature at the New Beverly, one of the smaller retro theaters here in Los Angeles that Tarantino, I think, owns or co-owns. But the point is, if you wanted to watch the entire Grindhouse experience, I feel like seeing it in a small theater like the New Beverly is the best way to go about it. Otherwise, you're probably better off watching the movies individually, which is something I would like to do in the future. Now that I've seen Grindhouse as a whole, I would like to rewatch Planet Terror and Death Proof on their own and see if my opinion changes, since they're not connected to the larger experience. If I may recommend a movie that's a more authentic and earnest throwback to the 70s exploitation, or in this case, blaxploitation movies, I'd recommend Black Dynamite, because that movie costs far less than Grindhouse. Grindhouse cost about $70 million, which no Grindhouse movie can afford that amount of money. I don't think a Grindhouse movie back then could even afford $500,000. But anyway, Black Dynamite is a movie that cost a lot less. It looks like a movie that was made in the 70s, but doesn't rely on all the gimmicks or all the fake film artifacts the way Grindhouse does. And that movie is just flat out funny as hell. It's one of my favorite spoof movies in the past 15 years. But as for Grindhouse itself, like I said earlier, it's good, but not great. It was a neat little experiment that I don't think succeeded 100%, but it's still entertaining at the end of the day. And there you go, that's my review for Grindhouse, which included Planet Terror and Death Proof. Now in 2 weeks, I'll be reviewing what I consider to be a more modern form of exploitation film. And it's a series of movies that I have been dying to review. I'm talking about Crank and Crank High Voltage, starring Jason Statham. I have mentioned these movies when talking about other Jason Statham movies in the past, but now it's finally time for me to review them, and I am hyped beyond belief. So in 2 weeks, look out for my double feature review on the Crank films. But first, I want to know what you guys think about Grindhouse. Which of the 2 movies is your favorite, and what are your thoughts on the trailers? Whatever your opinions are, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. If you want to find me elsewhere on YouTube, you can go check out my theme park and travel channel, Alexander Robinson Travel Channel, and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, Threads. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day and take care of yourselves.